I'm David Trowbridge. I'm an associate professor at Marshall University, which is in West Virginia. We just became an R2, but we are very much a teaching-focused Appalachian university. I have a 4.4 load and zero background in anything digital. Clio began as a one-class experiment, I thought, back around 2012, 2013. Like anything you make yourself, it kind of starts to break at the end of the semester, and I thought, well, this all worked really well. My students were hurt by the idea that Clio would go away. For the only time in my teaching career, they were not deferential. They challenged me, and they told me stories about how they had used Clio to go to see historic sites during their spring break, and how they had taken their memas and papas and shared things. And seeing how much it mattered to my students made me question, if I am who I say I am, I can't just walk away from this. And so I started learning about digital things. And here we are in 2020, and Clio has grown exponentially since that time, thanks largely to the NEH and others that have helped. About year 3 or 4 of the project, I finally started getting some grant support, and that has been incredibly important and created a lot of jobs for my students and recent graduates as well. All right, so Clio, it picks up your location. It uses these nefarious devices that seem to be, despite the name, not making us smarter or happier, but they are connected to the world around us, and everyone has them next to them at all times. So as much as we wish it was the railroad or the airplane, I think that these devices are the great invention of our times, and it's up to historians to use the technology of our day, as previous generations have always done, to connect people where they are. So you can see the young woman using Clio, discovering the site, that she's at the site of a 1963 sit-in. You can embed audio, oral histories, images, video, and then of course links to books and articles, because I'm a historian and there's no way I would ever lose a chance to do something like that. So here she is. There's no marker, there's no monument at the site of the sit-in, but she's learning about it. She's actually watching digitized footage of the sit-in and then transported digitally to a library where she can learn even more. That's how Clio sort of began, this idea of connecting people to historic sites, things that are there, things that used to be there, tangible things that you could put on a map. We named Clio in honor of the muse of history. It's theclio.com because Clio.com is legal software, a multi-million-dollar company. And if I had the kind of money to buy their URL, I would just give it all away to students. So it will probably always have a less than elegant URL, but that's where it comes from, the muse of history. And we're hoping to inspire people in that same way. So it's grown. There are now 35,000 entries around the country, over 800 walking tours. There is a walking tour in every state in the union except for Alaska. We haven't gotten one of those yet. Montana has 5 that just got added in the last few weeks. There are also over 50 virtual tours of museums and sites. I'll talk a little bit about how that's different from a walking tour. This is a brand new function. As soon as COVID hit and museums and sites started closing, I asked myself, what can I possibly do to help? And built a new function that is sort of like a walking tour, but really designed to work in a closed, in a single building or a small complex. It works a little bit differently, and I'll get into that. We're up to about 8 to 12 million page views per year. Clio gets more traffic than my university, more traffic than any other website in our state, with the exception of 2 other sites. People care about history and culture. And that's been one of the things I've learned. I knew that. I had no idea the scale of how much people care about history and culture. 35,000 entries, it's a passion project. Where does the content come from? Clio is not a wiki. There is nothing anonymous in Clio. Everything is attributed to an author. Although I should say that my staff of people who fact check every entry you can see them behind me. It's a system designed through gatekeepers. And so the gatekeepers are individual historical societies, museums, libraries, as well as university faculty who create entries with their students. The way it works is they set up these administrative accounts, then they can create, edit, and publish entries that have the name of the author, whether that be a student, a docent, a staff member, an intern, and then the sponsoring organization. So unlike a wiki, you know where the information is coming from. The bulk, the main thing about Clio is composed of individual entries. That's where we started. This is an example. Markers, monuments, things the public are going to naturally be curious about, historic buildings. If you care about people, you go where they are. And so we found that the things that got clicked on the most were things that people drove past and had curiosity about. Historic, beautiful buildings, those kinds of things. Markers and monuments usually don't have any text or very little text. When you're carving into stone or metal, you have to be concise. The nice thing about a digital resource like Clio is you can start with a concise paragraph, just like a museum label, but then that can open up into a larger narrative. Usually 3 to 6 paragraphs works out pretty well, and then links. It's like fishing. You were curious about this building, you were curious about this monument. Here's a little bit of more information. Would you like to know more? So here is an individual learning about the statue of Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history. In addition to the text, images, audio, and other information that's there, there's links to his books. So he has been virtually transported, like the previous student, to learn more about it. You can embed oral histories and media, sort of a if these walls could talk experience. So this is an entry for a sit-in. It was at the White Pantry. Sometimes you just can't make this stuff up. The place was called the White Pantry. And we found old WSAZ newsreel footage of the actual and embedded it right there. So you can see this young woman coughing because the owner of the restaurant lit sulfur cakes to get the students to leave his establishment. One of my students recently interviewed a woman who, when she was 17 years old, worked at the White Pantry, and she was there. So we have people, we have former students that were part of the civil rights movement sharing their stories, and now we have this added perspective, which talks a lot about the owner of the restaurant and how he responded. We have campus and community walking tours. The NCPH yesterday published a wonderful article of a student of ours at Marshall talking about his experience creating a walking tour that embeds primary sources, and it's also narrated by alumni and former staff and former faculty. One of the individuals he interviewed recently passed away, and so it was a wonderful chance for us to hear his voice, one of my mentors. The alumni include everything from NFL stars that are in the Hall of Fame to CEOs of major companies. Most of them are people we picked to represent the different generations and the diversity of our student body. Even embedded, you can hear the dedication speech of the 1972 dedication of the Memorial Fountain to those we lost in the 1970 plane crash, and you can hear those words echoing off of the fountain as people are listening to this. You know, this will be a symbol of our university and our resilience. Those words in 1972, hearing them today as you're standing next to the fountain. But you can also interpret the difficult histories of a campus, including a building on our campus that is still named after Albert Gallatin Jenkins, a man who captured and enslaved women and children during the Civil War. It includes links to letters of mothers looking for their children that Albert Gallatin Jenkins stole and sold into slavery. So we include all of the histories in these walking tours. Now, the new thing that we built when COVID hit is the capacity to create a virtual museum tour or a virtual site tour. The way these work is it basically is a walking tour within one entry, and you create this by creating one entry for the museum or the site, and then you hit this button that says create a new contributing entry, or you grab one of the existing ones, and you can have these sort of sub-entries for stops along a tour inside a museum. So for this one, the tour is one entry that includes stops at all of these galleries, and then you can hear, in this case, it's the director of the museum personally guiding you through each stop along the tour. The contributing entries, each author has the choice of whether or not they should show up on the main map. The nice thing about that is you're able to create a museum tour with multiple stops without creating this huge cumbersome cluster of entries all on top of each other that then users probably can't find the main entry for the museum. You can also create a virtual tour of any historic site. So here's one for Heritage Farm that includes a walking tour of each of the little log cabins and the people who rebuilt those. So you can hear the stories behind each of these places and the passion of the museum workers. You can hear the docents. You hear the guy at the blacksmith shop. You hear the museum tour guide talking about each place. You hear the stories of how you can actually see these log cabins coming down the holler, and they're trying to figure out how on earth do we get these back in place and reconstructed. I've been to that museum has a petting zoo, and I have daughters that are 6 and 7, so I've been there about 50 times. But in many ways, the virtual tour was the best tour because I got to hear all the stories behind all the places that I had sort of taken for granted. It's the same with the museum tour, hearing a little bit about the art and the collections and the passion of the curators and the people that bring and preserve these artifacts and works of art to our communities. That made all the difference for me. Other cool stuff, you can download these tours now and they'll work without a cell signal because these things, they're old school GPS receivers as well as anything else. So if you download the tour, it includes all the data spots. And without even a cell signal, you can take a walking tour that can include audio and entry and information. So we created a nature trail, and you hear both the human and the natural history. The park botanist and a science teacher walks you through it, and you can learn about the flora and fauna. One of the cool things, you can also find the trailhead. If you've ever been if you're a hiker, trying to find a trailhead is virtually impossible. But this thing knows exactly where you are and where you need to go next. You see a little blue dot and a direction showing you where you got to go. So one of the hidden gems is you can use this to find where you need to go, even when you don't have a cell signal. One of the cool things on the app we built was something called Discovery Mode. We tried push notifications, but it got annoying because there were so many entries. And sure, you can go back in the settings and change that, but I don't know about you. I start seeing notifications on my phone and I have this visceral reaction where I want to throw my phone. So what we created, I think, is more useful. It shows you a little blue dot where you are and the 10 sites nearest you. And those can include regular entries as well as contributing entries. So you can guide yourself around a museum, or you can guide yourself around a town, or you can go on a drive with your kids, hand the phone to the kids in the back seat, and let them play Stump Mom or Stump Dad as you're driving around and they're saying, hey, when do you think that building was created? The stories we've heard from a lot of parents, by about the 3rd or 4th time the kid does that, the next thing they say is, hey Mom, can we go see this place? Which is a whole lot different from what we normally do of dragging our kids from place to place. We're working with the American Foundation for the Blind to try to recreate something that would be helpful to help people with low vision take a walking tour. If you've ever tried to get Google directions, you have to kind of squint and you usually go the wrong direction for a while, and then you figure out, no, I need to go this way. So we added this. We're working on, it's not ready yet, but we're working on this augmented reality arrow. You'll see the blue line connecting you between point A and point B, and this arrow saying this way to the next stop. We think that could be technology that will help people who have low vision, but I think it'll be practical for just about everybody. And of course, we've added some virtual reality features. We use Google Street View, so you can look inside buildings and look inside museums. Sometimes I think that stuff gets a little too cool and too much fun, and then we forget to read. So now, how do organizations take advantage of this technology? Clio is free. It's free, full stop. It's free if you have money. It's free if you don't have money. You can go out and get a grant using Clio and keep all the money and pay your staff. If you do that, please pay grad students. Please pay recent graduates. Clio is free, full stop. How do you manage all this? Organizations sign up and they become gatekeepers. Each organization has an account that they can see all the entries created by their students or created by their staff, their docents, themselves, and they can go in, review each draft in progress, everything that's been submitted to them. They can publish it. If necessary, they can lock them to keep them from being edited by other people. I always say that that should only be in certain instances because vandalism is almost non-existent in a platform like Clio because it doesn't work. Unlike Wikipedia, where anyone can make a change and it goes live, entries have to be reviewed and approved. We even added things like instructional guides and videos. A site doesn't get to 35,000 entries if it doesn't have staff, unless it's incredibly intuitive and simple to use. So that was important. We're having a moment in history where people are really interested in the backstory behind monuments, some of which are being removed, some of which are not. No matter what happens, we are here to provide interpretation. This is an example of a monument that hasn't been in the news yet, but I suspect it will. You look at it in the eyes of someone in 2020 and have a visceral reaction when you see an enslaved person at the knees of Abraham Lincoln. This is not the monument that was supposed to be built. Henry Highland Garnett and other African-American leaders led an effort to create a monument that was supposed to show freedom in Africa, enslavement in America, and then freedom in America once again through Black military service. So the statue on the left is what African-Americans donated their money to create. The statue on the right is what was created. And of course, there's a backstory behind it that we get into a little bit more information. And then of course, a link to a book that gives you far more information about that and many other monuments. The process is sometimes more important than the final product. I worked with the National Humanities Alliance and others who surveyed students who use Clio. The response we get, I still can't believe over 90% of students say, I want to use Clio in my spare time, not just as something that is going to be assigned to me. I have students who drop my class or fail my class and continue to work on their Clio entries because this place matters to them and it has their name on it, and it's a source of pride for them. So over 140 universities have used this, 700 historical sites. It's completely free and open thanks to the NEH, and I hope that you will value organizations like the NEH and others that make this possible. That's all I got. So back to you, Eliza.